12 children descended into Whispering Canyon Cave on May 15, 1995, their voices echoing with excitement as they explored the limestone tunnels. Their teacher, Mr. Stevens, called out, "Stay together, everyone." But when the flashlights dimmed and the cave fell silent, only one voice echoed back. And it wasn't human. 30 years later, when spelunkers broke through a sealed chamber deep in the cave system, they heard something that chilled them to the bone. Children's voices calling out from the darkness, "Help us find the way home." The same 12 voices. Still young. Still afraid. Still trapped. Welcome to Lost Mystery Stories. Before we descend into this chilling tale of vanished children, hidden chambers, and voices that refuse to fade, tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a cave where the darkness seemed to watch you back? And if you believe these forgotten stories need to be told, hit that subscribe button because some mysteries echo forever. The morning of May 15, 1995, dawned bright and clear over Pine Ridge Middle School. 12 seventh-grade students had been selected for the geology field trip to Whispering Canyon Cave, a reward for their outstanding work in earth sciences class. Sarah Martinez zipped up her backpack, checking her supplies one more time. Flashlight, extra batteries, water bottle, and her journal. She was determined to document everything for her science project. At 13, she was already talking about becoming a geologist. "Ready for this?" asked her best friend, Emma Chin, bouncing with excitement beside the yellow school bus. "Are you kidding? I've been researching this cave for weeks," Sarah replied, clutching a printout about the cave's limestone formations. "Did you know it goes down over 400 feet? Mr. Stevens, their teacher, did a final head count. "All right, everyone. Remember the rules, stay with the group, don't touch the formations, and absolutely no wandering off. Whispering Canyon got its name for a reason. Sounds can carry for miles in there and it's easy to get turned around." The 12 students climbed aboard. Sarah Martinez, Emma Chin, Tommy Rodriguez, Jessica Park, Alex Thompson, Maria Santos, Kevin O'Brien, Ashley Kim, Brandon Clark, Samantha Gray, Michael Foster, and quiet Danny Walsh, who always carried his camera. The drive to the cave took 45 minutes through winding mountain roads. As they approached Whispering Canyon State Park, the limestone cliffs rose around them like ancient guardians. The cave entrance yawned black against the white rock face, a mouth waiting to swallow them whole. Park Ranger Lisa Brennan met them at the visitor center. She was in her 30s, experienced with the kind of confidence that came from years of leading cave tours. "Welcome to Whispering Canyon," she said. "This cave system has been forming for millions of years. We'll be exploring the main chamber and the Gallery of Echoes today." She handed out hard hats with mounted lights. "These caves are living, breathing systems. The temperature stays at 55 degrees year-round, so you might feel chilly. And remember, what you hear in there isn't always what you think it is." Sarah raised her hand. "What do you mean?" Ranger Brennan's expression grew serious. "Sound behaves strangely in limestone caves. Voices can travel through cracks you can't see, echo off chambers you can't reach. Sometimes you'll hear conversations from other parts of the cave system. Sometimes." She paused. "You'll hear things that don't have an explanation." The students exchanged glances. Danny raised his camera, snapping a photo of the cave entrance. They began their descent at 10:30 a.m. The cave entrance was a natural arch, wide enough for the group to walk two abreast. Their lights created dancing shadows on the walls as they moved deeper underground. The familiar sounds of the outside world, birds, wind, traffic, faded until only their footsteps and whispered conversations remained. "It's so quiet," Emma whispered, her voice immediately absorbed by the limestone. "That's normal," Ranger Brennan said, stopping to point out flowstone formations. "Sound gets muffled by the rock. But listen carefully, do you hear that?" They stood in silence. Somewhere in the distance, very faintly, came the sound of dripping water. "That's from the deep chambers," she explained. "The water you're hearing is probably 200 feet below us." Sarah was busy taking notes, her small flashlight illuminating her journal. She'd sketched the entrance tunnel and was working on a diagram of the flowstone formations. "How deep does this cave go?" she asked. "The mapped sections go down about 400 feet, Ranger Brennan replied. "But there are areas we haven't fully explored. Whispering Canyon is part of a much larger cave system that extends for miles underground." They continued deeper, passing through a narrow section called the Keyhole, a natural archway that required them to duck slightly. On the other side, the cave opened into the grand chamber, a cathedral-like space with a ceiling that disappeared into blackness above their lights. "Wow," breathed Tommy, his voice echoing faintly in the vastness. Mr. Stevens was keeping careful track of his students, counting heads every few minutes. All 12 were accounted for, their helmet lights bobbing like fireflies in the darkness. "Now we'll see why they call this the Gallery of Echoes," Ranger Brennan said, leading them to the far side of the chamber where several tunnels branched off into the darkness. "Danny, would you like to try something? Stand right here and call out, 'Hello.'" Danny Walsh positioned himself where she indicated and called out, "Hello." The echo came back immediately, "Hello, hello, hello." But then, faintly, they heard something else. A voice, distant and indistinct, seemed to answer from deep within one of the tunnels. The students looked at each other, eyes wide. "What was that?" Ashley asked. Ranger Brennan frowned. "Probably another tour group in a different section. Sound travels in strange ways down here." But she looked uncertain, glancing toward the tunnel where the voice had seemed to come from. "Can we explore that tunnel?" Sarah asked, her scientific curiosity overriding any fear. "That area's off limits," Ranger Brennan said firmly. "It's unmapped and potentially dangerous. We'll stick to the established route." But as they prepared to move on, they heard it again. This time it was clearer, a child's voice echoing from somewhere deep in the restricted tunnel. "Help! Help us!" Mr. Stevens stepped forward. "Is there another school group here today?" Ranger Brennan shook her head, her expression troubled. "We're the only scheduled tour. Let me radio the visitor center." She tried her radio but got only static. "The rock interferes with signals down here. We should head back up and—" That's when the lights went out. Not all at once. First Tommy's helmet light flickered and died, then Jessica's. Within 30 seconds, every single light in the group had failed, plunging them into absolute, impenetrable darkness. "Everyone stay calm," Mr. Stevens called out, but his voice cracked slightly. "Just stay exactly where you are. Don't move." Ranger Brennan's voice was professional but tense. "This shouldn't happen. These lights have fresh batteries. Something's interfering with the electrical systems." In the darkness, they could hear each other breathing, hear the fast beating of hearts, hear the shuffle of feet as someone shifted nervously. And then, from somewhere in the tunnels around them, came the sound of children's laughter. Not scary laughter, innocent, playful, as if other kids were playing hide-and-seek nearby. But there were no other kids. They were alone. "Did anyone bring extra flashlights?" Ranger Brennan asked. Several students had backup lights in their packs. Sarah pulled out her small flashlight and clicked it on. Nothing. The batteries were dead. One by one they tried every light they had. All dead. "Follow my voice," Ranger Brennan said. "We're going back to the entrance. Everyone hold hands, form a chain. Do not let go." They fumbled in the darkness, reaching out to find each other's hands. Sarah felt Emma's trembling fingers grasp hers. Behind her, she could feel Tommy's sweaty palm. "Is everyone connected?" Mr. Stevens called out. One by one they called out. Sarah, Emma, Tommy, Jessica, Alex, Maria, Kevin, Ashley, Brandon, Samantha, Michael. "Danny?" Mr. Stevens called. "Danny Walsh?" Silence. "Danny, call out if you can hear me." They listened intently, but heard only their own breathing and that distant sound of dripping water. And then, faintly, they heard Danny's voice, but it was coming from deeper in the cave, not from where he should have been standing. "I'm here," his voice echoed from the restricted tunnel. "I found something. You need to see this." "Danny, don't move," Ranger Brennan shouted. "Stay where you are." But there was no response. What happened next would be debated by investigators for years. According to the surviving accounts, the group tried to navigate back to the entrance in complete darkness, following Ranger Brennan's lead. But somewhere in the narrow passages they became separated. Sarah Martinez later testified that she was holding Emma's hand one moment, and the next moment she was alone, calling out in the darkness with no answer. When her vision finally adjusted, or perhaps when whatever was affecting their lights finally stopped, she found herself in a part of the cave she didn't recognize. She was alone. "Emma? Mr. Stevens? Anyone?" Her voice echoed back to her, but there was no human response. Just that strange, musical sound that seemed to come from the rock itself. A humming almost like voices but not quite. Sarah tried to retrace her steps, but every tunnel looked the same in the faint glow that now seemed to emanate from the cave walls themselves. Had the walls always glowed like this? She couldn't remember. She walked for what felt like hours, finding passages she was certain hadn't been there before, hearing voices that led her deeper instead of out. At one point she was sure she heard Emma calling her name from somewhere ahead, so she followed the sound. But the voice always stayed just out of reach, always around the next turn. When she finally saw daylight, Sarah ran toward it with desperate relief. She emerged from the cave entrance to find emergency vehicles, search teams and frantic parents waiting. Sarah. Her mother rushed to embrace her. Thank God you're safe. Where are the others? Sarah looked back at the cave entrance, confusion clouding her face. They were right behind me, she said. They should be right behind me. But as the hours passed, no one else emerged. The search began immediately. Cave rescue teams from 3 states converged on Whispering Canyon. They mapped every tunnel, explored every chamber, called out until their voices were hoarse. They found nothing, no trace of the 11 missing students, no sign of Mr. Stevens or Ranger Brennan. It was as if the cave had simply swallowed them. Sarah was questioned extensively. Her account never changed. They had become separated in the darkness, she had followed what she thought were voices calling her toward the exit, and she had assumed the others were behind her. She had no explanation for why she was the only one to find the way out. The cave was sealed 3 days later, deemed too dangerous for public access. Detective Ray Morrison had worked missing persons cases for 15 years, but nothing like this. 12 people, 11 children and 2 adults, don't just vanish without a trace. There had to be an explanation. Let's go through it again, he said, sitting across from Sarah in the interview room at the Pine Ridge Police Station. You were holding Emma's hand, then you weren't. When did you realize you were alone? Sarah's eyes were hollow, haunted. She'd barely slept since emerging from the cave 3 days ago. I don't know exactly. It happened so fast. 1 minute I could hear everyone breathing and moving around me, and the next minute I was calling out and no one answered. What about the voices you followed? Can you describe them? They sounded like Emma. Like she was calling my name, asking for help. But they always seemed to come from ahead of me, never behind. I thought I was following her toward the exit. Detective Morrison made notes. The official search had been called off after 72 hours. The cave rescue teams had explored every known passage, used sonar equipment, brought in cadaver dogs. Nothing. Sarah, I need to ask you something and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Is there any chance, any possibility at all, that you and your classmates planned this? Maybe as a prank that went wrong? Sarah's reaction was immediate and visceral. No. We would never. They're my friends. Emma's my best friend. I would never hurt them or scare them like that. Please, you have to keep looking for them. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, a psychologist brought in to evaluate Sarah, had her own concerns. She's exhibiting signs of survivor's guilt, but also something else. She keeps talking about the glow in the cave, about voices leading her out. It could be trauma-induced hallucinations, but her descriptions are remarkably consistent. The case made national news. Families flew in from across the country. Volunteers organized search parties. Psychics claimed to have visions of the missing children. But as weeks turned to months, hope faded. The official report concluded that the group had likely become lost in unmapped sections of the cave system and perished from hypothermia or other natural causes. Their bodies, the report suggested, may have fallen into underground streams and been carried away, or could be trapped in collapsed sections that would be too dangerous to excavate. Sarah Martinez was the only witness, the only survivor, the only one who could tell the story of what happened in Whispering Canyon Cave. And she never stopped insisting that her friends were still alive somewhere in the darkness, still calling for help. Dr. Sarah Martinez was 43 now, a respected geologist with a PhD from Stanford and a specialty in cave systems. She'd spent her career studying underground formations, driven by questions that had haunted her since she was 13 years old. She'd never returned to Whispering Canyon. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March 2025. Dr. Martinez? This is Dr. James Wright from the National Speleological Society. We've had a development at Whispering Canyon Cave that I think you'll want to know about. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. What kind of development? A private spelunking group was doing some unauthorized exploration. They broke through into a chamber that's never been mapped. They found evidence of your classmates. Sarah's world tilted. What do you mean, evidence? Backpacks, school supplies, a camera with film that's somehow still intact after 30 years. And Dr. Martinez, they heard voices. Children's voices calling for help. 2 days later, Sarah stood at the entrance to Whispering Canyon Cave for the first time in 3 decades. The state park had been closed since 1995, but special permission had been granted for this investigation. A team of cave rescue specialists, archaeologists, and recording equipment operators prepared to descend into the limestone depths. "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked Dr. Wright. "You don't have to go down there." Sarah adjusted her helmet and checked her lights, 3 of them with backup batteries. "I've been preparing for this for 30 years, she said. "If my friends are still down there, I'm going to find them." The cave felt different now. The passages she remembered were still there, but they seemed smaller, more ordinary. The mysterious glow she'd recalled from that terrifying day was gone, just gray limestone lit by their LED headlamps. They made their way to the Gallery of Echoes, where the unauthorized spelunkers had broken through a wall that had appeared solid for decades. Behind it was a chamber that didn't appear on any map, a natural room the size of a small auditorium with tunnels branching off in several directions. And scattered across the floor were the belongings of Sarah's 7th grade classmates. Emma's pink backpack, the zipper still halfway open. Tommy's water bottle with his name written in permanent marker. Danny's camera, somehow preserved in the cave's constant temperature and humidity. Jessica's journal, the pages brittle but readable. But no bodies. No bones. No sign of what had happened to the 12 people who had carried these items into the cave 30 years ago. "Look at this," called one of the archaeologists, holding up Danny's camera. "The film advances at frame 24. There might be pictures on here." Sarah approached the spot where Emma's backpack lay. She knelt and carefully opened it. Inside were the snacks her friend had packed for the trip, now fossilized by time and cave minerals. Her geology notes, the handwriting still clear. And at the bottom, a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before. Sarah unfolded it with trembling hands. Written in Emma's handwriting but somehow different, shakier, more urgent, were 4 words. "We're still here. Listen." As if summoned by the note, the voices began. Faint at first, echoing from somewhere deep in the unmapped tunnels. Children's voices, calling out as if they were just around the next corner. "Sarah? Sarah, is that you? We've been waiting for you to come back. We found the way deeper. Come and see." Dr. Wright grabbed his recording equipment, his eyes wide. "Are you getting this?" But Sarah was already walking toward the tunnel where the voices seemed strongest, her light cutting through the darkness ahead. Behind her, she could hear the research team calling out, telling her to wait, to stay with the group. But she'd been waiting 30 years to answer those voices. The tunnel beyond the hidden chamber sloped downward at a sharp angle, requiring them to use ropes for the descent. Sarah moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades exploring underground systems, but also with the urgency of someone following voices she'd never stopped hearing. "Sarah, we need to be cautious," Dr. Wright called out as he rappelled down behind her. "This section isn't stable. We don't know what caused that wall to collapse or why it's opening up now." But Sarah barely heard him. The voices were getting stronger, more distinct. She could make out individual words now, familiar inflections that took her back 30 years. "This way, down here, we found something amazing." The tunnel opened into another chamber, this one vast beyond their light's reach. But unlike the limestone formations above, this chamber was different. The walls were smooth, almost glassy, and they seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence that reminded Sarah of that long-ago day when she'd found her way out of the cave. And in the center of the chamber stood something impossible. It was Danny Walsh, exactly as he had been at age 13. Same clothes, same thick glasses, same nervous smile. He held his camera in his hands and looked up as their lights found him. "Hi, Sarah," he said, his voice carrying that same slight lisp she remembered. "I've been taking pictures. Want to see?" Sarah stumbled backward, her rational mind rejecting what her eyes were showing her. Behind Danny, other figures emerged from the shadows of the chamber. Emma, still 13, her black hair in the same ponytail she'd worn that day. Tommy with his gap-toothed grin. Jessica, Alex, Maria, Kevin, Ashley, Brandon, Samantha, Michael. All of them exactly as they had been 30 years ago. "This isn't possible," Dr. Wright whispered behind her, his voice barely audible over the sound of his own racing heartbeat. Emma stepped forward, her face lighting up with joy. "Sarah, we've been waiting for you. We have so much to show you. The cave goes so much deeper than anyone knew. There are chambers down here that are older than anything on the surface. Older than humanity." "Emma?" Sarah's voice cracked. "You haven't aged. None of you have aged. Time works differently down here," Tommy said, his voice carrying that same enthusiasm he'd always had for science projects. "We figured it out after a while. The deeper you go, the slower time moves. We've been exploring for what feels like weeks, but apparently it's been years up there." Sarah looked around the chamber more carefully. The walls weren't just smooth, they were covered in symbols carved deep into the stone. Not human symbols. Something far older, far more complex. "What is this place?" Dr. Wright asked, his recording equipment capturing everything. Mr. Stevens emerged from behind a formation that looked almost like an altar. He, too, appeared exactly as he had 30 years ago, but there was something different about his eyes. They held knowledge that seemed too vast for any human mind. "We've been learning, Sarah," he said. "The cave chose us to be guardians, to protect something that's been sleeping down here for millions of years. Something that's about to wake up." Ranger Brennan appeared beside him, her Park Service uniform somehow still crisp and clean. "The cave system isn't just limestone formations, Sarah. It's something much more. Something alive. And it's been waiting." Sarah felt the scientific part of her mind racing, trying to find rational explanations. Hallucinations brought on by cave gases. Some kind of preservation effect from the minerals. Mass hysteria affecting the entire research team. But another part of her, the part that had been 13 years old and terrified in these tunnels, recognized the truth she'd been running from for 30 years. "You're not real," she whispered. "You can't be real." Emma's face fell, hurt replacing the joy. "We're as real as we ever were, Sarah. Maybe more real. The cave showed us things, about time, about space, about what lies beneath the world everyone thinks they know. We're part of something bigger now." The chamber began to pulse with that strange light, growing brighter. The symbols on the walls seemed to writhe and shift, and from somewhere far below came a sound like nothing Sarah had ever heard. A deep, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to come from the planet's core itself. "It's waking up," Danny said, snapping photos with his ancient camera. "After millions of years of sleeping, it's finally waking up. And we're going to be here to see it." Dr. Wright grabbed Sarah's arm. "We need to leave. No. Whatever this is, we need to get to the surface and—" The ground beneath them shuddered, a tremor that sent loose rocks cascading from the ceiling. The thrumming sound grew louder, more insistent. "You can't leave," Emma said, her voice taking on a strange harmonic quality that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Not now that you've found us. Not now that you've seen. The cave won't let you." The tunnel they had descended through was no longer there. Where the entrance had been was now solid rock, as if it had never existed. Sarah looked at her friends, her 13-year-old friends who had been waiting 30 years for her to return, and realized she finally understood why she had been the only one to escape that day. She hadn't been saved. She had been sent. Sent to live her life, to become a geologist, to spend decades learning about cave systems and underground formations. Sent to become exactly the person who would be called back when the time was right. When it was time to wake up what lay sleeping beneath Whispering Canyon. 3 days later, search and rescue teams found the entrance to the new chamber sealed solid, as if the rock had melted and reformed. Dr. Wright's radio had transmitted for approximately 47 minutes after entering the chamber before going silent. No trace of Dr. Sarah Martinez or the research team was ever found. But spelunkers and hikers in the area began reporting something new. Voices echoing from the sealed cave entrance. Not cries for help, not anymore. But something else. Something that sounded almost like singing. A harmonic chorus of children's voices, joined now by adult voices, calling out across the mountain valleys. Not in distress but in celebration. The voices can be heard most clearly at dusk, when the light fades and the ancient world begins to wake. 13 voices that have become 14, singing something that predates human language, something that speaks to the deep places where consciousness first stirred in the darkness. Local authorities have declared the area off-limits indefinitely. Seismic monitoring equipment in the region has detected deep, rhythmic vibrations that seem to be growing stronger each month. And sometimes, on very quiet nights, hikers report hearing something else beneath the singing. A vast, slow breathing, as if something the size of a mountain range has finally begun to stir after eons of sleep. The children of Whispering Canyon Cave are no longer lost. They are exactly where they were always meant to be, singing their ancient guardian song, watching over something that the surface world isn't ready to meet. Not yet. But when the time comes, the voices will guide the way. Just as they always have. Just as they always will. Some say if you listen carefully to the wind in Whispering Canyon on a clear night, you can still hear Sarah Martinez calling out one final message to the surface world. We found them. We're all together now. And we're not coming back. The echo never fades. It only grows stronger.